So there have been humanoid creatures on the earth for millions of years. And there's been our own species, Homo sapiens, has been here for what, 150, 200,000 years? Until 12,000 years ago, which is like, if you can put human existence on a clock, then until 5 minutes ago, how did we live? We lived in small band hunter-gatherer groups, in communal groups, where people had each other to support each other all the time. And that was a blink of an eye ago.
Yep.
So the modern situation, from the point of view of human evolution, is completely abnormal, where there's isolated nuclear families, where there is social stress on people all the time. When people don't have that extended family, the communal support, it absolutely takes a village. And so that, in that sense, it's not that mothers are abnormal, it's that mothers no longer have the support that from
there's not all the aunts and
all the aunts and I had a Cree woman tell me once in Canada that in our culture, babies don't even touch the ground for 2 years.
Oh, well, that's a long time.
And which is a bit of an overstatement, but babies were carried everywhere, the papoose.
Right.
You know, and this idea of separate bedroom for the baby, and furthermore, the whole idea of sleep training babies, where you ignore that they're crying for help.
So you don't believe in that?
Oh my God. What message do you get? What message do you get as a 6-month-old? Why are you crying? You're not crying out of caprice or jollies. You're crying because you need something. You might need food. But here's the thing about infants. Like we mentioned, connection. Now, connection can exist on all kinds of different levels. You guys can connect with each other even if you don't see each other for a year. Even if you don't speak on Zoom, just because you love each other, because you can carry somebody in your heart. An infant can't do that. The infant can only connect by
physical needs.
So when an infant is crying, it's because they need to be picked up. And if you read about, there's a wonderful book called Continuum Concept by Jean Lidloff, who studied this tribe in Venezuela in the jungle back in the 90s or 80s. Those babies are never put down. So that book, as I was telling you before, is always in competition with one of my books. And it's either the second or the third one, either yours is or mine is, on medical child psychology on Amazon. And we make the same point that when children are bonded to you, they will follow your values, your guidance.
And they'll ask you for your help.
They ask you advice. And what happened in this culture is that because parents, look, in the United States, 25% of women have to go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth.
I know.
So that's barbaric.
I know. I literally said I will sell my house. It was the weirdest reaction, but
it was barbaric. And so kids are deprived of their parents. They connect instead to the other kids. Now they take their advice and guidance from other kids.
Yep.
And you can see what a disaster that is.
Or TikTok.
The other thing that you make is people think we're trying to coddle kids and hover over them. No, you make it very clear that you let kids do things for themselves when they're able to do it. They have to develop that resilience. They have to develop that self-trust. But you don't do it by denying them bonding. You do it by encouraging the bonding.
You may be feeling a tightening in your chest right now, or maybe a sudden sadness you didn't expect. That's not weakness. That's recognition. What Dr. Maté just described isn't a theory. It's the quiet story many nervous systems have been living for decades. And what's coming next matters deeply. Because now we move from how the wound forms to how that wound continues to speak through your relationships, your reactions, and your sense of self. So before we continue, just take one slow breath. You don't have to fix anything in this moment. You only have to listen. With gentleness.
There's no such thing as tough love. There's either tough or there's love, but there's no such thing as tough love. By tough love, they usually mean punishment and rejection, which is unhealthy. Discipline. We want to teach our kids discipline. Yes, we do. We don't want to teach it to them. We want them to develop discipline. But let's look at that word discipline. What's a disciple? Well, who follows you, yeah? Why did Jesus' disciples follow him? Because he loved them and they loved him. Kids, if we love them, They will follow us. They'll be our disciples. We don't have to force them into anything. Any parenting practice or educational practice that focuses on behavior rather than the child's underlying emotional dynamics is going to be harmful. Do you know Winnie the Pooh? Christopher is playing with his toys, and then he starts to grow up, and he has to go to school, and he won't be able to play with his toys anymore. The book ends with, but wherever they go in the enchanted forest, a little boy and his bear will always be playing together. And that would just bring tears to my eyes for decades upon decades upon decades. Because what we want out of child rearing is at the end of it, there should be an autonomous human being, respectful of themselves and of others, who can be authentic and connected at the same time. That's our goal. I don't think anybody would disagree that that's our goal for human beings. Christopher Robin's father, A.A. Milne, was a writer. He bought these toys for his son to make stories about them. And Christopher Robin actually suffered because he was secondary to his father's career. They did not have a good relationship. So these characters that the father made up kind of dominated and squeezed out Christopher Robin's own life. So there's something about the dysfunctionality in father-son relationships. When I realized that there's nothing to mourn because I'm both the bear and the little boy, and I always will be playing, that nothing is lost. But when I read that book, there was a sense of loss. When I read that passage, there was something's being lost. Childhood innocence is being lost. Playfulness is being lost, which resonated with my own childhood because I did lose innocence and playfulness very early in life. Now that's a natural developmental process as long as we provide the right conditions for it. But nothing in nature develops in the wrong context. So, I could have an acorn in my hand, and the nature of that acorn is to become an oak tree, but not if I leave it on my desk. A lot of parenting and educational practices focus not on the long-term goal and development, but on fixing the kid's behaviors in the short term. We talk about kids are acting out. What do you do when a kid acts out? Well, look at this phrase, acting out. What does it mean to act something out? When I say acting out, when I say a kid is acting out, you will probably think of a kid who's being oppositional or rude or disobedient or aggressive. But that's not what the phrase means. Acting out means to portray in behavior that which we haven't got the words to say in language. So in a game of charades, where you're not allowed to speak, what do you have to do? You have to act it out. If you landed in a country where nobody spoke your language and you had to portray hunger, you'd have to act it out. Kids are acting out their emotional needs. The question is, are we going to respond to the child, or are we going to try and suppress the behavior? So much of what's taught as parenting advice is designed to manipulate or shape or suppress kids' behaviors rather than understanding the child. I arrived home from a speaking trip to Philadelphia, actually. Arrived here at the airport in Vancouver. I'm feeling really good. Successful trip, good flight home. My wife, Ray, she'd pick me up at the airport, but when I land, I get a text saying, I haven't left home yet. Do you still want me to come? And I take a taxi home. And when I come in, I barely even looking at her, and for 24 hours, I give her the cold shoulder, the cold treatment, until she finally says, knock it off already. But what was that all about? Is that when I was an 11-month-old, my mother gave me to a complete stranger to save my life. The meaning that I made out of that, the traumatic wound, is I'm not wanted because I'm not lovable. Until that wound is resolved, which it hadn't been obviously fully 7 years ago, I arrive at the airport and something trivial like my wife, the woman in my life who I'm relying on, is not showing up. And then I get triggered defensive withdrawal, which incidentally is the normal response of young children when they're separated from their mothers, is that when they see them again, they don't even look at them. It's protective. The brain says you were so hurt when you were abandoned that you're not going to make yourself so vulnerable again. And so that's how the adaptive response, and by the way, as I found out from my mother many decades after the original incident, when I saw her again after the 5 or 6 week separation, I wouldn't even look at her for several days. So what are the irreducible needs of human beings, human infants, for healthy development? First of all, a strong attachment relationship in which they feel absolutely secured and welcome. That's just a need. We can grow without it, but our development is going to be distorted. our sense of ourselves is going to be distorted. So a strong, unconditionally loving attachment context, that's an irreducible need of the human child. In undergraduate groups, kids don't get put down to cry on their own. They're carried everywhere. As soon as they cry, they're picked up. If they even put down, kids are not made to sleep on their own away from the parents and to cry themselves to sleep. Sleep train them. When a kid is crying, it's because they need to be held. That's the need of the child to connect with the parents. And babies can only connect physically. When they're not picked up, they're losing their attachment relationship, so they cry. When they cry, their brains are suffused with stress hormones that interferes with brain development. All the parenting advice that parents gets these days, it's almost designed to interfere with healthy brain development. What trauma actually affects how our brains develop. Children have no self-regulation. So if you're stressed as an adult, if you're mature enough, you can regulate yourself. You can take a few breaths. You can calm yourself down. You can say, okay, slow down. Let me think about this. Let me deal with this. An infant can't do that. Infant's got no self-regulation whatsoever. So the infant's brain requires the mature function of the adult's brain to regulate itself. But what if the adult's brain is not functioning maturely because that adult themselves never got the right conditions for the healthy development? Now you have an immature adult's brain regulating or trying to regulate an immature infant's brain. So the self-regulation never develops. Trauma means a wound. That's the literal meaning of the word. It's a Greek word for wounding. So trauma is a psychological wound that you sustain. And it behaves like a wound. Then decades later, if anything reminds me of that, it hurts as much as it did when I originally incurred the wound. In communities, children had many parents. They knew their biological parents and had a special relationship with them, but they were really parented by the whole community. So they felt very safe, very contained, very connected. That's how we evolved as human beings. And we lived that way for hundreds of thousands of years. Needs of children are for unconditional loving acceptance in the context of a secure relationship where the child doesn't have to work to make the relationship work. The acceptance and the regard should be unconditional. Allow the child to have all their emotions. Whatever the emotions are, let the child have them, understand them. Don't force them to suppress their emotions. I'm not saying be permissive with behaviors. I'm saying don't force the child to suppress their emotions. Don't tell them not to be angry. Don't tell them to cheer up when they're sad. Validate the anger, validate the sadness. These are essential brain circuits for such feelings. Nature gave them to us for a reason. Allow the child to experience them. That way they can stay connected to themselves. 25% of women have to go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. Now that amounts to a massive abandonment of infants. But that infant physiologically and emotionally needs to be with the mom for much longer. We create the separation right from the beginning. You are the person we want in this world. Mm-hmm. So, secure attachment, unconditional. You don't have to be pretty, you don't have to be smart, you don't have to be compliant, you don't have to be cute, you don't have to be clever. You're the one we want. Play, it turns out, according to all the research, is much more important for brain development than cognitive learning.
Really?
And so there's all this stuff about baby Einsteins and teaching kids all this stuff early, and video games to promote brain development. It's all nonsense. What promotes brain development is healthy, spontaneous play. That's why animals play. That's why your puppies play. That's why bear cubs play. And in our society, we've almost totally deprived kids of spontaneous play. So when you say what it takes to develop a healthy child, meet those 4 conditions. And you'll have an emotionally healthy, balanced, connected, grounded, confident child. It's very difficult to raise kids these days because we're not living in the way that human beings evolved. Like every animal evolves in a certain environment and context and is suited to that environment and context. If you want to understand elephants, don't study them in a zoo. Parenting kids used to be a group activity. It happened in the tribe, in the clan. Parents had lots of support. Kids spent their whole day around their parents. It wasn't goodbye in the morning, hello in the evening. And most of our time is spent away from each other. That would never used to be the case, not throughout millions of years and hundreds of thousands of years. Now, we can't go back to that life, nor would anybody want to necessarily, but we have to understand what we've lost. It's difficult to blame a parent who is stressed economically or relationally or whatever and the kid is upset, well, here's an iPad, go soothe yourself.
Right.
Not a question of blaming, but that child loses human contact. That child learns to soothe themselves through some technological gadgetry rather than developing the internal circuitry of self-regulation, And the message is they don't matter. The great Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who died about a year ago, he said that the greatest gift a parent can give to their child is his or her own happiness. So take care of your emotional states, because your kid is sensitive enough to be downloading your emotional states and making them their own. So if you're stressed, unhappy, depressed, anxious, addicted, believe me, your kid is going to absorb all that and make it about themselves, that there's something wrong with them. So take care of yourself. Live a life that you can live with. And if you get the first 3 years right, by the way, you got it made. So when your kids are really small, consciously make the first 3 years as stress-free and as clear of psychological dysfunction as possible. That means work on your traumas. Work on your relationship with your partner, your spouse. Now, as to cuddling kids, let them experience the stresses of life. Believe me, they will. That's how life is. We don't have to add extra stress to their lives by punishing them. They're going to have disappointments. Their friends will not want to play with them one day. Their cat will die. They may break a leg. They will lose a beloved object. Mom or dad may get sick. Their best friend will move away to a different town. These are the inevitable stresses of life. We don't have to impose stresses on kids. What we have to do is to help them cope with the stresses that naturally arise. When a kid has grief because their best friend moved away, you hold them and you say, that's really sad. That makes you feel sad, doesn't it? You don't buy them a toy to make them feel better. You let them have their sadness, but you support them in that sadness. Parents who cuddle their kids, try and protect them, try and bribe them, they're not helping their kids. But neither are parents helping their kids who punish their kids or who force their kids to suppress their natural emotions. And in the end, Christopher and Winnie the bear, the little brain, who's the smartest of the whole lot, and they walk off together, and the book ends with the statement, something like, and whatever they do, wherever they go in the enchanted forest, the little boy and his bear will always be playing together. And that phrase would bring tears to my eyes for years. Because play is so important. And joy is so important. And that's what these people are talking about. And they didn't allow themselves to experience it. They sacrificed the play and the joy for all these other things.